Hello, everyone. We still have a few people logging in, so we're going to give them just a minute or two to get settled, and then we'll get started. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Link Center today for this shared learning group focused on the topic of navigating the criminal legal system. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items while we get started today. The session is being recorded, and the recording and the transcript will be posted on our website. We welcome you to revisit the content there yourself and share it with others. Attendees cannot see the names of other attendees, and all attendees are muted. Please use the chat function in Zoom to communicate with other attendees and hosts in the webinar. You can use the chat by clicking on Chat at the bottom of your screen. Be aware that your name will appear in the chat if you make a comment. And if you'd like, you can change your display name by clicking on the three little dots next to your name and selecting Rename. We will have representatives from the Link Center watching the chat and responding throughout the session today. If you'd like to submit a question or a comment privately to the host and panelists, you can do that by clicking on the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We do have live captioning and ASL interpreters present today. We will be spotlighting the active speaker and the ASL interpreter throughout the webinar. If you click on View on your Zoom screen, you can change the way you see the panelists. And if you're having any trouble with your view, please let us know in the Q&A and we'll try to help you out. So at this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Dr. Stacy Nonamaker, who's going to start today's presentation. Stacy, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. As Stephanie said, my name is Stacy Nonamaker. I am with the National Association of State Directors of Developmental Disability Services. It's a mouthful. That's NASDS. We are one of the partners of the Link Center. By way of a visual description, I am a middle-aged white woman wearing glasses. I'm wearing a black, brown, and white patterned sweater sitting in front of a white background. We are so very excited to be talking about this topic today and to be hosting this shared learning group. We are the Link Center, funded by the Administration for Community Living. And if you don't yet know about us, please take a moment, use the QR code or the link on your screen and check us out. We have a website, and on the website, we try to keep up with the most up-to-date, relevant information, resources, training that all aligns with how we can better support individuals with IDD, brain injury, and other disabilities who have co-occurring mental health conditions. So we like to say, check out the website, check us out often, because we are constantly putting new information and resources up there for you all. So what are shared learning groups? They are an offering through the Link Center. We host them quarterly, and every quarter we have 4 meetings, one for direct support professionals, one for clinical professionals, one for individuals with lived experience, which will happen later today, and one for families of people with lived experience. The information and the topics in all 4 presentations per quarter is the same. We do tailor a little bit of the information for each group, particularly in the discussion questions that we ask you all. These meetings, the shared learning groups, are a collaboration among the Link Center partners, and you will hear from some of those partners today. And those are people with lived experience, researchers, and people who work on policy issues. We record and transcribe every shared learning group. If you jump on our website, you'll see previous shared learning group recordings and materials up there. And transcribing means that we just write down all the words that we say during the meeting, and we will make the transcript, we will make the recording, any materials that we share today, we'll make that all available on our website. And you'll see a link that goes directly to those previous recordings and materials in the chat. So today, if you haven't already, please say hello in the chat. We want to know who's joining us. So maybe your name, maybe the state that you're from, any sort of affiliation, group, association membership that you may have. Again, we just want to say hello, want to know who's joining us and who we're talking to today. We will be talking about and setting the stage just why we think it's important to talk about navigating the criminal legal system. We will also share some resources, some trainings, and other information related to this topic. And then we will do a group exercise where, if you haven't joined us before, we'll open it up to a conversation where we present a challenge and we talk about what are some potential solutions and things that we need to be thinking about when we talk about navigating the criminal legal system. We have a few goals for our time together today. And really, I love the name Shared Learning Group because the emphasis is on shared, because we're going to share what we're doing at the Link Center related to navigating the criminal legal system. And you'll learn the importance of supporting someone and the things that we're learning. We'll also share those resources, and you'll know, hopefully by the end of our time together, where to find some resources about navigating the criminal legal system. And then the share part is we're going to learn what you think about supporting someone to navigate the criminal legal system. And we'll learn from you if there are any resources, information that you all tap into when you're thinking about navigating the criminal legal system, and help us identify if there's any gaps or needs that we at the Link Center can fill when we think about what really is needed to help someone navigate the criminal legal system. And then, as I said, during the group exercise, you will help us come up with ways to solve example situations presented. One of the things that we are most proud of at the Link Center is that we have a steering committee comprised of 14 individuals with varied lived experience from across the nation who inform and guide all of the work of the Link Center. And some of that you will see throughout today's content. Excuse me. But for every shared learning group, we have developed with our steering committee some foundational shared living experience that we'd like to put out there in advance of jumping into what we have for you today. So this meeting will be talking about people involved in the criminal legal system. And we understand that some people may have experienced trauma or experiences related to the topic. And all of that makes it hard to recover and move forward. So we ask that you take care of yourself. You do what is necessary for your comfort and care during our time together. And we encourage you to be gentle with yourself and each other because this is hard work to do. We celebrate that we are all individuals from different backgrounds. We celebrate that we have shared experiences to learn from. We know that we are each unique with our own experiences in the world. And then finally, we listen and share with open minds and kindness. We do not judge or blame others for what they share. Again, we want to create a space where we all can share what we're thinking, our experiences, again, because this is the opportunity for us at the Link Center to hear from you all. So before I turn it over to our colleagues, you're going to see this prompt now, you're going to see this prompt later, and we're going to ask you if you have some go-to resources, trainings, websites, just places that you get information when you're thinking about the topic, navigating the criminal legal system. What are they? So if you can share that with us, we'd really love to be collecting those resources, vetting them, elevating them, and putting them on our website if appropriate. Or really, again, as I said before, identifying if there's any gaps in what is out there that we could perhaps take and take action as the Link Center and fill those gaps and develop some resources. So now we're going to jump into the content, and I get to turn it over to our colleagues and partner of the Link Center, the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators, Judy Detmer, Zeta Ricker, and Maria Crowley. So I will turn it over now to Zeta. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. It is so nice to be with you and really appreciate the wonderful group of folks that we have on the line and you taking time out of your day to join us. Thank you so much for sharing some of the resources that you are putting in the chat. These are all wonderful and encourage everyone to check them out. My name is Zeta Ricker. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Policy for the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Judy Detmer, who is our Director of Technical Assistance, and Maria Crowley, who's our Director of Professional Development. And NASHA is a nonprofit organization made up of the state brain injury program leads within each state and their partners. And we are a proud partner of the Link Center. We have had a focus over the last several years on supporting people with brain injury in the criminal legal system because of the high prevalence of people with brain injury within the system, which we'll get into in a little bit. But we know that these experiences are not exclusive to people with brain injury. There are many people with IDD or other disabilities who have criminal legal system involvement and are hoping that we can work together today to think through ways to best support them. As we continue the conversation, just another reminder that we recognize that the topics in this presentation might be upsetting or hard for some people because they cover sensitive issues about the criminal legal system. Please take care of yourself. It's absolutely okay to step away or take a break if you need to. Your well-being comes first. You may have also noticed that we are using the language criminal legal system instead of criminal justice system. And that is because the word justice might suggest that something is fair or equal. And we know that many people in the criminal legal system do not experience fairness or equality or justice. The criminal legal system often treats people unfairly, especially those with disabilities or from marginalized communities. And so by saying criminal legal system, we want to recognize these unfair differences and highlight the legal rules that cause them. So we just want to take a few minutes to kind of set the stage about the challenges that folks with disabilities who are in the criminal legal system might experience, some of the prevalence, and then highlight some ideas of ways that we can help to improve the system. We know that people with disabilities are more likely to be victims of crime, get arrested, face charges, and spend more time in prison. Once in the criminal legal system, people with disabilities deal with extra challenges, unfair treatment, and it may be especially hard for them to access needed services, especially as we're thinking about services that are disability informed or really help to think about the specific needs that a person may have. All of this combined can make it very hard to get out of the system, or for those who do re-enter may be more likely to return to criminal legal system involvement or to return to jail or prison. We are going to also highlight some specific challenges with police and then talk about some of the prevalence within the system in jails and prisons. So I'm going to turn the time over to Maria to talk about this.
Hi everyone, Maria Crowley. I am with NASHA, the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. And I have silver hair, wavy hair, and a blue sweater on, and I have the Link Center background behind me. And NASHA is very proud to be one of the Link Center partners, and I'm very happy to join you today. So just to dig in a little more, as Zeta told you, I'm going to start with some information related to challenges with the police. Law enforcement does have a lot going on, but they may not recognize that what they see is actually what may be going on. Police may not recognize the signs of brain injury and intellectual and developmental disabilities as they're working with individuals. They may see problems with memory or communication differences and challenges as someone who is being uncooperative or dishonest. Someone who appears to be irritable or impulsive may be viewed as someone who is being aggressive instead. The police may misunderstand how someone who has a brain injury or an intellectual or developmental disability is communicating or reacting, which may lead to very unfair treatment, especially if someone takes longer to communicate or react to a situation. And survivors of trauma who have experienced a brain injury or an intellectual or developmental disability may show signs of that trauma that officers could misinterpret, which may cause further harm to a person. And ultimately, if we don't train police to make some changes, the consequences are significant and it's too late. We know that half the people who die at the hands of police have some kind of disability. That's a pretty impactful statistic. So, once individuals are involved with the system, you can see some of the data that's here in front of you about, well, just to back up a little bit, you can see 8.5% of the general population are involved with the criminal legal system. The Centers for Disease Control consider that a public health crisis. When you see that 50 to 90% of people in the criminal legal system have a history of brain injury, that's pretty impactful data. 40 to 50% of youth in the criminal legal system have had some kind of brain injury in the past, and about 40% of the people who are currently in prison have an intellectual or developmental disability. That's significant. That's something we need to do something about. And then further, when we start taking a look at data on mental health co-occurrence and intellectual and developmental disabilities, studies show us that about 1/3 to 1/2 of children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities also have at least one mental health condition, and that children with IDD face trauma much more often than children without these disabilities. That also is very significant. And then here what you see is mental health co-occurrence and brain injury. In gray, you see that occurrence with the general population again. And then in red, you see that occurrence with justice involved with brain injury. And you see history of substance abuse, history of mental illness, attempted suicide, childhood trauma, adult trauma, and school suspension. You don't have to be able to see those exact numbers to see that there's a lot of difference across those statistics. Pretty disproportionate there. And then we know from these numbers that with the occurrence of a brain injury, those challenges worsen. So for someone who's not had a brain injury at all, in blue here, the numbers are much lower with depression and anxiety, hallucinations, cognitive challenges, violent thoughts, ideation about suicide and suicidal attempts, than they are with even one brain injury and then more than one brain injury. Those challenges get worse each and every time. And again, you don't really have to read the numbers to see what this chart is showing you. That gets worse each time. So just to kind of do some review here, for people with brain injury and or intellectual or developmental disabilities, and one is not necessarily exclusive of the other, individuals can have both of those things going on at the same time. You've got a lack of recognition of someone having a disability within the criminal legal system. That's, often rampant because those challenges are hidden. Maybe they've never been diagnosed at all, or they are viewed as something else entirely. Individuals have a difficult time getting the right treatment for the challenges that they're experiencing related to those things. There's an increased use of services while someone is in prison for health and mental health treatment. You've got lower rates of completing treatment and higher rates of disciplinary issues going on. Someone is experiencing more rule violations for some of the factors that we talked about before: impulse control, irritability, behavior challenges, and you have higher recidivism. People are going back to prison. They're not staying out. All of those things, combined, create a lot of challenges, for individuals that are a part of that criminal legal system. And people are struggling with mental health challenges, substance use disorders. And it's very frustrating for the individual and the staff that are working with them. But there are a lot of solutions that can be applied, some very simple strategies that can be applied that we're going to be talking about.
Thank you so much, Maria, for setting the stage for some of the challenges that people with disabilities may face. We also want to point out that there's intersectionality of these challenges. Intersectionality means understanding how different aspects of a person's identity, like race, gender, disability, or sexual orientation, can overlap and combine to create unique experiences of discrimination and oppression. One form of prejudice can amplify another rather than being considered separately. So within the criminal legal system, we also know that there is a disproportionate amount of people of color within the system. Black, American Indian, Latinx individuals are more likely to be involved with the criminal legal system than their white or Asian counterparts. And since, as Maria highlighted, we know that there's so much co-occurrence with brain injury and IDD and other disabilities in the system. We know that there are likely many people of color who also have brain injury, IDD, or other disabilities within the system. Black people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and brain injuries are also less likely to be diagnosed before they enter prison, which may cause some specific challenges in not being able to recognize why they may be experiencing some of these things. Particularly in the case of brain injury, oftentimes folks don't even realize that they have had a brain injury or that the brain injury might be impacting their cognition. Women and transgender people, especially those from racial and ethnic minority groups, are often victims and survivors of trauma. This may not be noticed or dealt with in the criminal legal system. Women and LGBTQ people with intellectual and developmental disabilities or brain injuries may face higher risks of gender-based violence, hate crimes, and exploitation. We know, for example, that those with IDD are more likely to be intimate partner violence survivors, and that oftentimes intimate partner violence survivors also have a brain injury from strangulation or loss of oxygen to the brain, or from blows to the head. And so it can be particularly challenging as they navigate the criminal legal system. And many of those folks are involved in the criminal legal system as well. And these are just a few examples. There's many other intersections that can happen within the system. And it's really important to understand how different challenges can overlap and to help everyone, regardless of their background, get the services that they need. While we've highlighted some of the challenges, we also know that there are gaps in our understanding of the challenges. There's not enough research on people in the criminal legal system with intellectual and developmental disabilities, brain injuries, those who might have both IDD and brain injury, and mental health disabilities. And we would really love to see more research put into not only the prevalence, but also the understanding of some of the specific interventions that might be helpful, because we know if we have that data, that we will be able to get those resources out there more broadly, and hopefully better resources will lead to better outcomes for people with disabilities. So just to kind of recap some of the things that we've talked about and make sure we are all on the same page as we move forward, we have a few things listed that are our shared understanding and goals. We would love, though, if you feel like we've missed any of these, to please put in the chat any additional shared understanding or shared goals that you think that we should have moving forward. People with disabilities often face fear, bias, and lack of resources when involved in the criminal legal system. Professionals may not know enough about disabilities, which can lead to errors like misidentifying a disability, assuming someone is not capable or trustworthy, or pressuring someone into admitting to something they didn't do. These mistakes can lead to wrong placements in institutions or people giving up their rights without realizing it. Individuals with disabilities are valuable and have the right to fair treatment. They should not face discrimination or mistreatment in the criminal legal system. They should have fair access to services and programs. And everyone with a disability deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, no matter their involvement in the criminal legal system or other personal traits. If there's anything else that you think we should add before we move into talking about some of the solutions, we would welcome that and want to ensure that we are making sure that we have this shared understanding as we think about some of the ways that we can help to improve the system. I want to take a moment to also thank the steering committee for helping us to think through some of these shared understanding, and also to make note as we move into some of the solutions that we want to think about some of the ways that we can make systematic change the system. And sometimes that does take small action to change the system, but that really we should put onus on the system rather than onus on the people with lived experience to change the system as we look to improve services for people with disabilities. With that, I am going to turn it over to Judy Detmer to give a introduction to a person with lived experience, and also wanted to share a few resources with the group that help highlight some of the challenges and how to overcome them. So with that, I'll turn over to Judy.
All right, thank you so much, Seda. My name is Judy Detmer, and I am, excuse me, Director for Technical Assistance at the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. I have short hair, I wear glasses. Today I have on a black shirt under a gray jacket. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all today and to talk about this important topic. I want to start by introducing you to a colleague of mine from a different state who has lived experience both with brain injury and also with the criminal legal system and other co-occurring conditions. We asked if she would be willing to tell her story, and I'm grateful that she was vulnerable enough to do so. So we're going to play this video for you. Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today and sharing your story. I'm just really feeling honored that you're taking the time to do this and share your personal perspective on this issue. So I'm going to jump right into the questions. I wanted to ask you, can you share a little bit about your brain injury?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for taking your time to talk with me today. My life was dramatically altered by the consequences of experiencing severe emotional distress and sustaining multiple traumatic brain injuries. Unable to cope in healthy ways with personal challenges, I endured multiple head injuries, each resulting in significant periods of unconsciousness. These physical traumas, compounded by the existing burden of having a learning disorder, bipolar disorder, post traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression, severely impacted my emotional regulation. The result was a cascade of negative changes. I became easily agitated and hypervigilant, struggling to control my emotions. Anger became a dominant force, hindering my ability to communicate effectively and advocate for myself. Lacking knowledge about my condition and the appropriate coping mechanisms, I felt lost and overwhelmed.
Michael, I know you, have known you for a while, but I didn't know all that you have experienced. So I've always been impressed by who you are as a person. Your experiences definitely shape who you are, and I'm more impressed even now hearing more about your life. So thank you for sharing all that with us. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with the criminal legal system?
While I deeply respect the work of law enforcement officers, my experience with the criminal legal system was profoundly negative. I've endured physical injuries and sustained significant emotional trauma, including a deep-seated fear of law enforcement. I believe that by working together, we can improve the system. This could include mandatory training on mental health and de-escalation techniques for officers, as well as increased access to mental health resources for individuals in contact with the law. I am very grateful to see that these changes are beginning to be implemented in the state that I live in.
And that's a great deal in part to you. I know that you're a strong advocate, and I really appreciate all the work that you've done in your state, but also nationally, because this is going to be a national video. And I think that people hearing your message will be inspired to make some change as well. Can you talk a little bit about how your brain injury has made these experiences more challenging for you?
Having sustained multiple traumatic brain injuries during a period of intense personal and emotional distress profoundly impacted my ability to navigate the criminal legal system. My emotional regulation was severely compromised, making it incredibly difficult to remain calm and communicate effectively in stressful situations. Unfortunately, encounters with law enforcement officers who lack training in de escalation techniques often escalated, leading to arrests that might otherwise been avoided.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Can you talk a little bit from your perspective? What do you wish could have been different in your experiences with law enforcement?
It's difficult to say what I wish could have been different. In an ideal world, I would have encountered a system that recognized and responded to the unique challenges I faced. A system where law enforcement and court personnel were trained to understand and de escalate situations involving individuals with brain injury, learning disabilities, mental health conditions. Instead, I experienced repeated arrests, leading to a criminal record that has significantly impacted my life. However, I also believe that these experiences, while incredibly difficult, have motivated me to advocate for change and to improve the system for others facing similar challenges.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for. Sorry, I don't know, my arrow is being fussy. There we go. So I'm again really appreciative to Michael for sharing her story. And I know that you all probably have some similar stories or understanding and have had encounters or your loved ones with law enforcement that sound familiar to what she has experienced. And so we've been describing a little bit of the problem or a lot of it of the problem. And we know it is a big problem in terms of how the criminal legal system interacts with people with disabilities and behavioral health issues. However, what we want to focus our time on now are some of the solutions that could be implemented to help improve those outcomes. So I start with this. Some of you may be familiar with this. This is the sequential intercept model, and it was developed by Policy Research Associates as part of the SAMHSA's GAIN Center. It is just a really nice way to look at how people move through the criminal legal system, with Intercept Zero being that point before they're really involved in the criminal legal system. So one thing that I feel is an area of opportunity for all of us is to start really focusing on Intercept Zero, making sure that people get the right support so they're never engaging with law enforcement in the first place. But unfortunately, we see a lot of people not getting the support they need, so then they start to get engaged with law enforcement, which is Intercept 1. And then Intercept 2 is really related to that court hearing and initial detention. When we get into 3, we're talking about jails and courts. I think I saw something in the chat. I'm just kind of looking in the corner of my eye at the chat, but something about kind of diversion, jail diversion, and that's what these courts are meant to do. So there's a lot of different types of courts out there that work towards special populations and keeping them out of the jail system in the first place. Then Intercept 4 is reentry, starting to move out of jail or prison back into the community, with 5 being community reentry with parole and probation. So I want to just talk a minute about what are some of the things that we could do in terms of systematic changes or, individual advocacy to help across the Intercept model. And the first Intercept, just as a reminder, now we're talking about law enforcement here. Zero can fit into this as well, but a big piece of this is training. And I know training is not enough, but it is an essential component. The more people understand and are exposed to disability and brain injury and co-occurring behavioral health issues, the more they're going to understand and recognize when they're faced with somebody who might be experiencing that issue or concern. So we want to do that kind of training. Co-respondent models that are out there are very helpful. Both entities, though, the co-respondent behavioral health specialist as well as the law enforcement officer could really use this training. And then the other piece is thinking about who in our community are frequent users or interact frequently with law enforcement and following up with them, trying to get them connected to resources to help avoid that in the future. Intercepts 2 and 3, we can dig in a little deeper in these intercepts. Law enforcement doesn't have kind of the capacity or time, honestly, to be able to do some of the screening for disability or brain injury. As was mentioned earlier, a lot of people are coming into the system without the system understanding they have a brain injury or a disability. And honestly, the person themselves may not know that. And same with mental health. So once we get into intercepts 2 and 0, what we're really promoting is that we start thinking about how do you screen for brain injury and other disabilities so that the person can then devise interventions to help them move through the justice system without kind of that revolving door of involvement. This is where treatment courts kind of sit. And again, I think they are an ideal setting to have some intervention because they are all about jail diversion and they are meant to really do those wraparound supports. And so screening is just a natural flow for this and providing interventions and support. I don't know if anybody in the audience has a veteran as a family member or you yourself are veterans, but just to say there are these veteran justice outreach specialists, and they are significant support as we think about veterans entering into the criminal legal system. When we get into intercepts 4 and 5, now we're talking about kind of moving from jail into re-entry. Some of the things that I want to highlight, we want to try to make that transition as smooth as possible. And part of that is doing in-reach. And so when we meet with service providers or administrators, we're suggesting that it's important to be able to go into the jail setting or into the prison setting to establish that relationship, to make sure that the person leaving has already a connection to you or a service provider so that they will follow through once they get out. If we wait until they're released, we're going to miss our opportunity. The other piece is just to ensure there's not a disruption of medication and that we are, again, doing that connection right as they're leaving the setting. And this can be true, too, for those who never go into jail, but maybe are on probation. While they're under supervision of a probation officer, it's helpful to make that relationship and that connection. Because rightfully so, people have a distrust as they're leaving the setting. I want to also talk a little bit about a framework that the criminal legal system uses. I think when we talk about systematic change or systemic change, it's really important, no matter what system you're talking about, that we do so within the context of what they're using for their framework. And it might help you as family members to understand, if you don't already, kind of what they're looking for. So one of the frameworks is risk, need, and responsivity. And so when they are looking at this, they're looking at their primary purpose is public safety. So they're looking at risk to reoffend. Given that public safety is their focus, they want to think about what are the needs of the person so that they can be thinking through what factors can we influence? What are some of the things we can change? So for example, we can't change that my eyesight is poor, except for to wear glasses. But what we can change is if I struggle with stress and anxiety and I'm easily escalated, how do you teach me calming techniques, mindfulness, or different strategies that can help me lower my anxiety level so that I don't end up finding myself, as Maria described, reoffending or having higher, what they call infractions, things where I'm not following through or doing the right things to get through the legal system. And then responsivity is the things we literally do to help provide that support. So just keep in mind that risk need responsivity framework as we're thinking about supporting the person you love. So again, that risk is about returning to prison is strongly linked to brain injury and intellectual disability and mental health. So unfortunately, the people that we are supporting and the people that we're taking care of are already set up to be at greater risk for reoffending, and the data show that they do reoffend at higher levels. What we see is that people with disability and mental health can have that increased agitation, depression, or irritability, and decrease self-regulation, planning, organization, judgment, reasoning, and problem solving. With the risk need responsivity model, we want to flip that on its head. We want to see an increase through support with self-regulation, planning, organization, judgment, reasoning, and problem solving, and therefore decreasing that agitation, depression, and irritability. It's very hard to do without support. So when we think about support in this context, some of the things that we are recommending and promoting are that, first of all, people need to be identified. If it's not known that a person has autism or IDD or brain injury, you can't provide the support needed. And then we want to also really promote that the system itself, the criminal legal system, and the people that work within it can provide accommodations, both formal accommodations through the Americans with Disability Act, but also informal adjustments and supports such as compensatory strategies. And then the last piece is connecting people to those community supports, as we mentioned earlier. So we've already kind of talked about this, but I do want to just reiterate that it's so important to screen because we know that people are moving through the criminal legal system without being identified. And again, they themselves may not understand that disability is part of what they're struggling with. And so when we understand that someone has a disability or a mental health issue, we want to understand, it helps us understand their current mental and emotional state. Any kind of communication difficulties they have or behavior and issues related to planning and impulse control. All those things that make it challenging to meet the conditions of being in the criminal legal system. And if honestly, we don't understand that stemming from a disability or mental health issue, what happens is that the perception is that the person is willfully not doing what they need to be doing. And then that leads to greater consequences. So we want to shift that to understanding that it's a skill deficit. We again know that people with disabilities and mental health are more likely to get involved with the criminal legal system than others. So, and that includes across that entire INTERCEPT model. So because we know that this is an important issue, this is why we want to try to really work with our criminal legal system partners to ensure that they have the tools necessary to support people. Screening for lifetime history is really just understanding that someone had a disability or had a brain injury or has a mental health issue. It doesn't necessarily tell us what challenges they're facing right now. And so we encourage systems to go beyond just screening for disability, but rather also screening for what are the current effects of that disability. How is it making it more challenging for them to move through the criminal legal system. And then really importantly, it helps the person themselves understand what their needs are and understand what they need to be able to improve their outcomes. In other words, to become better advocates for themselves. Same for family members. That helps family members understand that as well. So when we talk about screening, it's best if tools are evidence-based, easy to administer, free or low cost. And Stacy put in the chat some links to tools that you can take a look at. I do want to stress that we know that the criminal legal system is already overburdened. And so that's why we very much stress that it needs to be a quick screen, something that doesn't take much time, resource, and staff. And it needs to be free or low cost because, again, the budgets are pretty low as well, but they're very critical to do this. The other piece that we want to keep in mind when we think about screening is doing so in a trauma-informed way. Our colleagues at the Brain Injury Alliance of Colorado have developed kind of a tip sheet for how to do this when we think about people with brain injury, but it really fits anybody going through the criminal legal system. And that is, first of all, start by giving the person an overview of the questions that will be asked so they know what to expect. That will reduce some anxiety. Make sure that they know that we only need to share information that helps identify disability or mental health, that they don't need to share anything they're not comfortable with. Help explain that the screening and the results, or the results of the screening, I'm sorry, will be discussed. And if the results show disability or mental health concern, the critical piece is that the next step is to give them strategies. The whole goal of screening is to help someone understand how can they manage their symptoms, what kind of compensatory strategies do they need, and help the system also understand what they can be doing differently to adjust to support the individual. So in these learning series have different audiences. So we wanted to break down what the different audiences could do in terms of supporting screening. So I'm just going to go linear here, but clinical professionals can integrate screening. So if you're working with a clinician with your family member, that's something you can promote too as a family member, is to advocate for that. Direct support professionals can advocate for screening, identify the challenges for the criminal legal staff as appropriate. And then you as family members can advocate for screening. And again, helping to identify challenges for the criminal legal staff as appropriate. If you have a relationship with the person in your life who's willing to let you talk with the criminal legal staff, you provide a perspective of what supports that person might need. And then for people with lived experience, our goal again is working towards systematic change so that self-advocacy is important to ensure screening happens for people with disabilities and disabilities are identified. So everybody has a role to play. One thing before I go into this, I do want to just mention that, and you guys maybe have heard this in your interactions, we know that the criminal legal system personnel sometimes can feel like, I can't do anything with this. I don't know how to work with people with disabilities. I don't know how to work with behavioral health. But really they can. And what you'll see in the next few slides is that what we're really suggesting are some basic compensatory strategies, kind of with a universal design in mind, that anybody can help implement. But when we think about screening, I mentioned early on that the places that are really appropriate to promote that screening, it's not necessarily law enforcement. Law enforcement is really, we're trying to help them recognize the signs of disability, that they might be in front of somebody who has a mental health issue or a disability. They're not going to be able to sit down and do a screening tool. But as the person is entering into the criminal legal system, if someone has an ongoing relationship with them, like a probation officer, an attorney, or a court official, they are the ones that can really be looking to administer those screening tools. Okay, so once we know someone has a disability and they have some co-occurring challenges, then what? I think the message that is important to impart again to the criminal legal system and anybody who's not a specialist in disability is that we're not asking that they're focusing on treating the disability. What they're really looking at is what is the person struggling with so they can think about that as they're providing support in other areas. It helps make disability and mental health clearer to non-professionals, non-mental health or disability professionals. And again, a really important message that we want to say, it does help empower people with disabilities and behavioral health challenges and their families to speak up for the right supports. So that's a big message we want to impart. So I just want to talk about compensatory strategies briefly. There are various needs that people with brain injury and IDD may have. Our goal today was just to give some examples of those differences related to language. We put it in that context. We know there's all kinds of different challenges that people experience, but as I go through what the strategies are, I'm hoping you get a sense of that I'm trying to impart that these are kind of universal ways of approaching people and some simple strategies that anybody can implement. So this is just one example. The Link Center is working on a resource with additional ways to support people, and that'll be depending on their different needs. So look forward to that. So again, universal strategies, that's kind of what we're focused on, is that when we talk about all of these strategies, they're helpful for everybody going through the criminal legal system. I mean, it's not an easy process to navigate for anybody. And then when you add into it someone who might have cognitive challenges or behavioral health concerns, that's when these strategies are vital. They will not succeed without this support. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to put this in the context of language. Some of the things that we observe when someone's struggling with language skills is that they may not interpret body language. They may have inappropriate eye contact. They may not respect space and a personal bubble. They may say too much or too little. They may have little awareness of their behavior. They may say "ha" frequently, indicating that they might be confused or not following what you're saying. They tend to be followers, and so they can find themselves in situations legally that maybe they didn't intend to get into. They struggle with sarcasm and abstract language. Oops, apologies. The other thing we see, if people struggle with language, oftentimes they may withdraw. They have poor grammar, so it may be hard to understand them, and they may be difficult to follow in a conversation. They may not stay on topic very well, and then they have some difficulties navigating social roles. All of these things can make it very challenging in a criminal legal setting. So this is the example of some of those simple compensatory strategies in the context of language that I wanted to share so that you can think about other challenges someone might have and how those strategies can be pretty simple. But first of all, just be direct. Avoid that abstract humor, sarcasm, or metaphors. Allow wait time so that they have time to process what has been said. Ensuring, because we tend to just run right over people. We don't give them the time to think about what you're saying before they respond. And we need to do that for people with disabilities. Provide instructions and directions slowly and one at a time. Don't overwhelm them with instructions. Ask if it would be helpful to repeat or rephrase your message. Make sure that they comprehended what you actually said to them. And this last one, and Zeta talked about this early on, but really it's important to let the individual know that we value their input, thoughts, and feelings. Again, this is a very marginalized group of people who are further marginalized by being in the criminal legal system. And so just showing that respect goes a long way. Okay, so the last piece was connection to community services. And so, as I mentioned, it's really important that we think about how do we make connections for people as they leave the criminal legal system to community services that can hopefully provide supports to help reduce recidivism. And one of those big things is establishing those partnerships and developing referral mechanisms between community legal entities and service providers. To me, this is a two-way street. If I work in the criminal legal system, I should want to look outward and see who can I refer the person to help keep them out of the system in the future. But also it tends to fall on the service provider to really reach in to the criminal legal system to let them know they're out there, they're available, they can support the person as they're leaving. We want to make sure that the unique needs of specialty populations are taken into consideration when making referrals. It's very essential to connect individuals to gender responsive services that are easily accessible and flexible. Ensure that access to victim advocacy services are accessed as needed. Services should also be culturally responsive to historically marginalized groups such as BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ communities, who tend to be overrepresented in the system, as we've been discussing. If you weren't a part of the October shared learning group, that might be a video link that you want to check into, because some great tips and strategies were provided in that group. I listened to it recently and it was really eye-opening for me. Ideally, we want to ensure that there is targeted case management available. It's really, we can't just give people the resource and say, get connected. We really want to ensure that they're connecting by giving them the support. So we want to provide assistance with applications, appointments, problem solving, and advocacy, that more direct support versus just simply referring to an organization. That will help with that follow through. So again, thinking about the different roles of people, here are some of the ways we thought the different roles could help people connect to community services. When we think clinical professionals, it's supporting people in accessing additional appropriate services or connecting to case management services in the first place. For direct support professionals, we want to be sure that they're providing support with accessing or providing that targeted case management to connect to additional resources. For you as family members, it's about advocating for connection to those community supports. And then for a person with lived experience, it's about self-advocacy to ensure that they receive those appropriate services. Okay, with that, I am going to turn it over to Max and Jean to talk or walk us through a group exercise.
Well, thank you very much for that. So my name is Max Barrows. I am Outreach Director for Green Mountain Self-Advocates, which is the state organization that I work for. I have a long, I'm wearing a black tie along with a white striped shirt, kind of like white shirt, but like thin blue stripes. I'm a black man with a, short black hair, and I have a white background, which is the Link Center background with the logo. If you were looking at the screen on the top right, I'm wearing black headphones, and that's my description. So what we are going to do is we are going to, present a scenario that talks about navigating the criminal and legal system. What we hope is that we hear from you about how you think about this topic through the discussion around the scenario. So there's no wrong answers and ideas, because we believe you are the experts of your own experiences, and we want to hear from you. The Link Center wants to know what you are thinking so we can elevate things you bring up that we haven't, thought about, or so we can take action on some things as well. You can do this by raising your hand to come off mute and even come on camera. And if you want, you can write your thoughts in the chat, or you can email us and we will put our email in the chat for you. Remember, if you need to step away or take a minute to regulate and calm, please feel free to do so. So again, we just want to hear from you, so that way we can elevate things you bring up that we haven't thought of about, and so we can take action in some of the things that we hear. So on that note, here we go with the scenario. So Malik is a young adult with intellectual and developmental disabilities, IDD, and a history of depression. He was placed in prison when he struggled to understand the rules and follow staff instructions, and was quickly labeled as non-compliant. However, his disability and mental health needs weren't taken into account, putting him at risk of staying in prison instead of receiving the support he needs to thrive. So as you kind of, put that in your minds, the questions we have for you is, and I'm going to do one at a time. First one is, what steps would you take to ensure that Malik's needs are understood and addressed by the criminal legal system?
Hi, everybody. I am working with Max here, and I will be reading your chats. My name is Jean Farr. I work for NAD. I am an older white woman with short brown hair, glasses, and I'm sitting in front of a brown backdrop. And I'm delighted to be here working with Max. So as soon as you have answers to these scenarios, as was noted earlier, you're welcome to come on screen or type into the chat, and we will share your insights with all of our friends on this call. So I'm seeing, I'm seeing that Sarah says that Malik would need to be screened for various conditions.
Mhm.
And Carol asked, does he have a lawyer?
Good question.
Absolutely.
Anybody else on what steps would you take to ensure that Malik's needs are understood and addressed by the criminal legal system?
Jacenia says, find out if he has a support system.
Mm-hmm.
I would also add the importance of making sure he has all of the supports he needs to be able to communicate optimally.
I think we have someone's hand is raised.
Okay.
Hold on, let me get him. I can see
Carol
him.
also chatted that does he have access to necessary medications?
Melinda Murphy has her hand raised. Go ahead, Melinda.
Hello, my name is Melinda Murphy. Do you guys want me to describe what I look like? I am a middle-aged woman with long blonde hair, and I'm on my couch in my home right now. I just want to make this statement that once an individual is in prison, it's too late. Dealing with the criminal legal system and the Department of Corrections, once that individual is already behind those bars, it's too late to establish a support system, because the reality is most individuals that work in those settings honestly do not care about the individuals that they house. So that is why it's so important that these individuals don't, we need steps to intercept before individuals end up behind the bars.
Mm.
Mm.
Very, very good point. Yeah. Moving,
Yeah.
yeah, going on with the chat, Carol mentioned, does he have access to necessary medication? Christine noted that sleep, medication, and food can impact communication. Janet wrote, find out who at the prison would be useful in striving to make the needed accommodations. And Linda wrote that if a person is being confronted initially by law enforcement, that's where it should begin. That if Malik knows of his challenges, he could have a profile page or card that alerts others to his challenges. He could self-identify. If he does not know about his challenges, then a trained personnel person is called to establish a relationship first and then screen him. Courtney notes earlier when you were talking about him not understanding instructions, I know it's better for me if someone gives me instructions one step at a time, and also it helps to both say it and write it down. Judy noted, thank you for your question, Janet. Screening can be conducted by a variety of professionals across the Intercept model. Judy wants to stress that we are not talking about diagnosis, just screening to understand if they may have a history of brain injury or disability, with the goal to provide targeted support. The cost to these screens are minimal or free. Jessica mentioned, I agree, and possibly saying it twice, especially in a situation like this. I think that reinforces the importance of kind of remembering that the person is in a highly, highly stressful moment in their life, and that ensuring to communicate respectfully in ways that will help that person understand is awfully important.
Yeah. Unless there's anybody else that has anything to say in the chat, or if they raise their hand and go off mute. I have another question that we have. Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, let me mention that Lincoln says Slippery Rock University of Pennsylvania implemented a pilot program where they train social workers and partnered them with local police. Only a small number of people have partaken in that program. But that sounds like a great resource. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your thoughts on this question.
Oh. All righty. So the next question we have for you is, how would you help ensure a successful plan? Oh, Janet has something in the house. Janet Schaus has something to say in the chat. Sorry, Janet. I'm not familiar enough to the prison or jail system to know who. Okay, we got more coming in. I'm not familiar enough to the prison or jail system to know who on the staff would be available to do these screenings. And then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And then Melinda says, I believe Allegheny County has co-responders as well.
Yeah. Nice. All right. So the next question we have for you is, how would you help ensure a successful plan for re-entry that gives Malik the best chance of success?
Janet noted that with for-profit prisons, she's wondering what incentive is there to this? It's a great point.
So again, how would you help ensure a successful plan for reentry that gives Malik the best chance of success?
This is Judy. I just wanted to jump in on, because I'm having a hard time keeping up with the chat. There's so much good information in there. But I kind of saw a couple of comments about advocating for diversion programs. I do think that that is a really important component to supporting people with disabilities and behavioral health issues that come into the system. I think an argument for that is that it is a significant cost saver. There are, when we talk about like specialty courts and treatment courts, there are state court administrators that oversee all of those within a state. So I know some states have been successful at helping to create either specific courts for people with disabilities. There's definitely ones for people with mental health or drug concerns. But for people with disabilities, sometimes they create a specialty docket within like a mental health court. So I think it's a matter of understanding how your state's handling that and then reaching out to that court, the person coordinating those specialty courts, to see if there's a way to help ensure that people with disabilities are included in that kind of programming. And then there's just comments about screening, and I definitely respect what's being said. Janet, your comment about the for-profit prisons, that is a challenge that is bigger than this learning session, unfortunately. And it can be an issue, but I think that the incentive to do screening is that once people, at least in the systems that I've been working in jails and prisons, once they understand the data, they start to understand why they're struggling so much with certain people. And so understanding that, recognizing the disability and these compensatory strategies that are something that is something they can implement, that motivates them because they want to be able to be successful. Okay, sorry, I just felt to jump in instead of typing it.
No, that's great. Thank you for that. And feel free, because you're adding important context to these comments. Building upon what Judy was saying, there's also the importance, Melinda talked about connecting him with community resources. Carol noted that he has a place to live, access to medication. Melinda talked about the importance of helping him find employment, which is key. Carol talked about the national minimum standards for this transition might be helpful. That every state's different, but there are also real local and county differences within the states. Lincoln notes that there are are there transition counselors in prisons? That their mom used to work in a prison, and she said typically once they clear the national backgrounds release criteria, as for example, no parking tickets anywhere, etc., the inmate is simply given a bus ticket and released. I'm sure that doesn't help with repeating one's offense. And Christine says, bring in the case manager or supports coordinator from the county, or see about eligibility and get on their radar as soon as possible. See what supports exist or have worked in the past, and have him connect to an advocacy group in their area. Melinda notes that diversion is key, and Zaida, talked about the great points that were made by Carol. So this is wonderful, wonderful comments and clarifications.
Good, really good. So the last question we have for people is what can you do to hold the system accountable for providing the right care and support? What can you do to hold the system accountable to providing the right care and support?
It's a minute to think about this.
Here we go.
Sarah noted, in my lived experience, there's nothing a parent can do to hold the system accountable. Melinda said, advocate to your state legislators. Janet says, if you have legislators who care, you might get them to make that part of the contracts for prisons.
Mhm.
Melinda says, Sarah, I agree with you. That's why we must keep fighting and advocating.
Mhm.
And Carol says, in the past, we could have reached out to the Justice Department, federal, and now it will have to be more local.
Mhm.
Yeah. Lincoln says, contact local newspapers, media, social media, do your best. Andy Dufresne, I hope I said that correctly, from Shawshank. Write a letter every week, then write 2 or more once you reach a small goal. Yeah. I know that legislators and journalists pay attention to frequency, right? When messages keep coming in, they're noticed. Let's see.
Anybody else? Here we go.
Lincoln says consistent messages from groups and power in numbers. Yeah. Well, we so appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, here's another.
Yeah, work with disability rights networks in your states.
Cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Judy, excellent ideas, everyone.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So these are all extreme. Oh yeah, here we go. Another
Oh,
one.
yeah, and
There's
your
so
case-
many coming in. Hold on.
Yeah. Can a different communication person be part of the mandatory intake process? Like a Spanish interpreter, but not exactly. And Lincoln talked about the Pennsylvania Prison Society.
Mm-hmm.
I assume that's a resource.
And Mariah Cowley said, and your ADA coordinators.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's Americans with Disabilities Act.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, these are all excellent, excellent ideas. And thank you so much for, there's more coming in, but we'll see what I can do. Judy says, Jessenia, I think, yes, it's part of the ADA.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Wendy. So Wendy,
Great.
the floor is yours to close out. Take it away.
Thank you, Max. Hello, everybody. I am Wendy Morris from the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors, or NASHPD. I am a late middle-aged woman. I am white with long gray hair, and today I'm wearing a black turtleneck, my glasses, and some big dangly earrings. So as we close out today, I want to thank you all so much for being here and for the great discussion. We want to encourage you to continue to add to the chat. What are your go-to resources, training, websites? Where do you go to get information and supports that will help us to develop materials and really inform us about where you go for information to navigate risky behaviors and other items of interest? That shared learning, we really want to hear from you. Next slide. So here is a schedule of past and upcoming shared learning groups. You can find recordings, transcripts, and material from past events on the Link Center website, which we'll share in just a minute. You can find and register for upcoming shared learning groups on the website as well. The next topic, as you see on this schedule, will be developing regulation and coping skills, and that will be April 22nd and 23rd. We'll have that offering. Next slide. You can visit the Link Center's website at any time. The address and the link are here on the screen, and we'll drop it in the chat as well. You can also email the Link Center if you have any questions or suggestions. So you'll see our email here. Next slide. We do have a quick evaluation that we hope you'll complete for us. Again, shared learning, we need to hear from you. So on the screen, you'll see a QR code that you can scan with your phone. We'll put that link in the chat as well, and it will pop up automatically when we close out today. So you can take care of that right away. And it will also be sent out in an email to everyone if you don't have the time to do it now, or just don't feel like doing it right now. Your feedback on the evaluation really helps us to make improvements and adjustments for future webinars and products. So it's very appreciated. Next slide. So again, thank you today for participating. We want to make a special thank you to our colleagues at NASHA, the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators. We also want to thank our Link Center's steering committee for their time and valuable input to these shared learning groups. So Michael Cook for sharing their thoughts and experiences, Jules Good with Autistic Self-Advocacy Network for reviewing content, various steering committee members for informing the content for this meeting, and all of the partners at the Link Center for contributing to the preparation and content of this meeting, and of course to ACL, the Administration for Community Living, for their funding and support of this program. So that is all we have today. Have a great afternoon.